Okay, so in this video, we're starting section 5.4, which is completing the square. We're going to talk about what that is and how we're able to do what we do. So this is just kind of it's a couple minute video, but it's important to understand how we're able to complete the square and what it gives us. So it's a way in which we can take a quadratic expression that can't be factored and actually factor it. And so we're manipulating it so it's easier for us to solve. So if we look at something like x squared plus 3x plus 7, we'd say what two numbers multiply to 7 but add to 3? Those numbers we can't come up with off the top of our head. There's numbers that exist, but it's hard to do with the process that we talk about when we factor. So we're going to go ahead and talk about completing the square. Actually get into it, I want to talk about this vocab that we're going to see is a perfect square trinomial. Okay, so what's a perfect square trinomial? We're going to talk about what a perfect square is first. 4 is a perfect square because we know two numbers that are the same multiplied together equal 4. 9 is a perfect square because two numbers that are same multiplied together equal 9. So we know that those are perfect squares. So now if we add the trinomial piece, the idea is, well, if we have two factors that are the same multiplied together, they're going to create this quadratic. Well, this quadratic is a perfect square trinomial because if we factor it, it's going to equal two factors that are the same. So another example, looking at it in standard form, this guy is a perfect square trinomial because when we factor it, we get two factors that are the same. And that's what a perfect square trinomial is. So when we're completing the square, this is what we're creating, and it makes it easier for us to solve these problems. So here are some examples. We're going to complete the square, and what I want to do is, before I tell you exactly how to do it, we know that the perfect square trinomial is something that when we factor it, it's going to be the same thing. So this one, if I was to factor, it would be x minus 5x minus 5. Reason being is that negative 5 plus negative 5 is negative 10. Well, working backwards, looking at the factored term, well, we know that that constant is created by multiplying these two guys together. So that would be 25. So for this type of basic example, 25 is our answer. Before we go to part B, I want you to look at another term and see if you can identify the pattern. I'm going to tell you what it is in the video, but I want you to think about how am I getting the 5 in my factored term, and how do I get that 25? Or I kind of already told you that. But if we have this as our quadratic expression, what's the number that I'm going to add here? Okay, well, I'm going to tell you right now the number that I'm going to add is 16. Well, how did I get 16? Well, I know that when I factor it, my two factors need to add to equal that number. Well, two numbers that are the same that add to 8 are 4 and 4. So another example. Well, what two numbers do I need? They gotta be the same and they have to add to 16. Well, that's going to be 8 and 8. Okay? And so then that means to complete the square, I would put 16 in here and 64 in here. I'm just multiplying these two guys. Okay? So what's the process? The process for completing the square is we take the middle term, which is negative 10 in the example where I just erased. So we take this middle term, and we're going to add in that middle term, which is b, thinking of a standard form for a quadratic, right? Middle term is b, and divide it by 2, and square it. So if we look at these extra examples I put on the board, what's 8 divided by 2? 4 and 4. What's 4 squared? 16. What's 16 divided by 2? 8. That's where we get the 8 from. What's 8 squared? 64. And we can keep on doing that and doing that and doing that. Now, one other thing to consider is if I was going to factor this, so that would be the solution, 25. That's the number that needed to be added in. Well, think about what the factor looked like also, because we're eventually going to factor these. You'll see those in the second and third videos in this lesson. Notice that our factors are whatever the middle term was divided by 2. And that creates an easy process to factor, because if we look at part B, it's an odd number, so dividing by 2 doesn't work very easy. So the number we add in, we'll just do the b over 2 squared. And this would be our answer. We've just created that perfect square trinomial. Well, let's factor it. Well, we know the factors are just the middle term divided by 2. So even though it's not a nice number, that's what our factors would be. So that's what a perfect square trinomial is, and the process to complete the square is we just need to add the middle number divided by 2, square it, and that creates the perfect square trinomial.